So this is our first actual live in-person recording to come back on the beautiful shores of Canandaigua Lake with a couple of, what are we drinking again? Is this the American Pale Ale that we have here?
I've already forgotten.
That's how good it is. So we're Twisted Rail Brewing, easy to say, for the return of The Other 51, joined with my former boss and good friend, Mark Obbie, freelance writer, to talk about freelance writing life. Mark, thanks for taking the time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
With me. So you actually, first of all, kind of give a little background on your career and kind of how you got to your career point, what you do now.
Started in daily journalism as a reporter, moved into trade journalism at a fairly young, tender age, and reporting and writing about lawyers. And then that turned into a management job at still a tender age in my late 20s. And I stayed in editing and management for a really long time in Texas and New York. And then eventually made my way into magazine editing, and then when I decided to leave New York, I went into teaching. That's where we met. I taught for 8 years at Syracuse while I tried to freelance, and did freelance some, but I wasn't freelancing as much as I wanted. I wasn't able to do the kinds of long-form, deeply reported pieces that I wanted. So a little over 4 years ago, I bagged that and went into full-time freelancing, and I'm fabulously wealthy now.
Sarcasm. That's the sarcasm font there. Actually, we worked together. We met when you were writing your it was an ebook on the how do you pronounce it? Gianchetti case, very famous one up here in central New York, and I played a very small role in researching parts of that book. But actually, that experience was very formative for me because I was new to grad school. I was just finished my first year of grad school, and I still had the journalist delusions of, well, I'm going to write a book someday, and everyone wants to write a book, and I'd cover the scandal at St. Bonaventure. And I'm like, I'm going to write a book on that. And then working with you, I saw just how much work goes into a reported nonfiction book. And like, no. And with all respect to it, I'm like, that is way more than I can do to it right now. That was really eye-opening to me, to be honest.
And to me as well, because I had only done magazine pieces of, 4,000 or 5,000 words at a pop. And here I was trying to write an 80,000 word book, which ultimately did not sell as a full-length book. I was only able to sell it as a Kindle single, which was about 20,000 words. And so I had 80,000 words worth of reporting and research that I distilled into a 20,000 word ebook called God's Nobodies. And that was a revelation to me about the economics of book publishing for authors, especially now that the days of six-figure advances are all but gone for people like me who are not big stars.
Right. So what is, kind of a running theme we've had on this is the writers who start writing a book, like journalists who write books. And, I feel like it's one of those things that all young writers kind of think of. Well, I'm going to write a book. We're going to write a book someday. Everyone's got a book in me. I'm going to write a book. And from your experience, what is that leap from writing 4,000 to 5,000 words for magazines to even the 20,000 word ebook that you wrote versus up to that 80,000 full book?
Well, I haven't made the second leap yet, although because I'm a slow learner, I'm working on a book proposal right now that I hope will be a full-length book. But just leaping from 5,000 words to 20,000 words was creatively a big challenge for me. It's hard enough to write a good 5,000 word piece, and Lord knows I've been humbled over and over and over by good editors who have helped me turn my mush into well-crafted or better crafted features. But I struggled to write a 20,000 word piece, and the danger is that you can just indulge your curiosity about everything and forget that not everyone is that curious about every little thing. Mm-hmm. But I still want to try to flex those muscles and to write in long form. the longest form available to me, just because it's a challenge, and that we all like challenges.
Yeah. So how much reporting does go into even like that the 80,000 words of reporting that you did for the 20,000 word ebook? Can you give me a sense of what that level of depth of reporting is?
Well, generalizing is impossible, because if I write a self-help manual, it's going to be one form of research and time. If I write a travelogue, it's another depth of research. And to do what I did was probably the most time-consuming and the hardest, which is investigative reporting on something where virtually no one wants to talk to you, where finding the truth is really, really difficult. And it's in my case, I spent 4 years of, not full-time, but spanning 4 years of effort, sometimes full-time. So I estimated that it was almost 2 years worth of work. And ultimately I was paid about what you would get for a good magazine feature story of 5,000 or 6,000 words. So it was just, the economics of it were just appalling.
And is that something that's changed since kind of the digital age, or like 2008 when the economy kind of cratered, or is that always like the writer's life kind of?
Well, if anything, it's worse now, because there was a time not that long ago when friends of mine and bigger stars were able to command six-figure advances almost routinely. I mean, you had to be really good at your craft, but it wasn't crazy to think that you could get a six-figure advance for a good idea and a lot of hard work. Those days are practically gone now. Some people do make a really good living cranking out lots of ebooks of the 15 to 20,000 word length. The kind of stuff that I do, it just really doesn't lend itself to that. And sometimes I wonder if I'm making excuses, but it really doesn't lend itself to that. And I wish it did, because it would pay the bills a little better. So some people can make money at magazine work, at online work, and at books. But it's really a lot harder than it used to be for most of us.
So you write a lot about crime and a lot about victims of crime. How did you kind of develop that as your beat, your niche?
Well, since I was a baby reporter, I've been interested in law and courts, and I covered cops and courts off and on my whole career. And when I wanted to return to freelance writing, some of the first ideas I had were about crime, but I wasn't that into the whole criminal justice policy world. I had no particular expertise or interest in crime victims, but when I wrote God's Nobodies, I over-reported God's Nobodies. One of the pieces that never made it into the ebook was about how we treat crime victims, and about a concept called restorative justice that really captured my attention, and that you helped me learn about as a researcher. And so that was a springboard into refining my niche and really drilling into an expertise that I have stuck to now for the past 3 or 4 years.
Okay. I apologize to everyone listening for the ambient noise of cars and wind coming off of Canandaigua Lake here. Adding a little atmosphere to it. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you for this episode was being a full-time freelancer that you are, and I feel like for a lot of writers at some point in our lives, like that's the dream, like to be the full-time freelancer. And you're kind of living that reality, and we talk enough to know that I know what that reality is really like, as opposed to kind of like the vision we all have of it. So give us a little reality check on the life of a full-time freelancer.
Well, I can only give you what I have seen and what I've experienced, because I know a lot of freelancers who make it work in their own realms, and I haven't been as smart as them or as crafty as them, but I've really struggled. I work really, really hard. I work all the time, pitching, writing, rewriting, and I make what I would consider a a mediocre income for a beginner, and I'm not a beginner, and I'm doing work that a beginner couldn't hope to touch. Not to sound arrogant, but it's just true. And that's really frustrating. When I let myself think about that, I get very frustrated. I'm indulging my desire to do this despite the economics of it, not because of them. And if I were 20 years younger, I'm in my late 50s. If I were 20 years younger and I was worrying about putting kids through college and saving for retirement more than I have to worry now, I just couldn't possibly do it for very long. I would have to compromise somehow, but I'm in a position where I haven't compromised. I'm happy creatively, as happy as any creative ever is, which is, if my wife heard me saying I'm happy, she would burst out laughing, because I'm always complaining and raging at dumb editors. But it's just the economics of what I do are really, really daunting.
Okay, what's the daunting part, the most kind of daunting part of that?
Well, I was an editor starting in the late 80s, and I didn't hire a lot of freelance, but I farmed out a fair amount to freelancers. And I used to apologize 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I would apologize for paying $1 a word because it was all I had a budget for. I have editors now act as though they're doing me a favor by paying me $1 a word. The rates have just tanked, and that's the main reason. The economics of the business have tanked, and therefore what publications can pay online. I work for a lot of online-only publications. What they're able to pay is just nowhere near what it's worth in sheer hours for the kind of work I do.
And why is your sense? Why have the rates tanked so much?
Just because the economics of the business have just collapsed. As we all know. I mean, in print, ad pages have shriveled, and online the rates are just far lower. And so most of the places that I've been writing for are nonprofits that don't care,
right?
That have a rich sugar daddy, because otherwise advertising just doesn't cut it, and nobody's willing to pay for subscriptions.
That's got to be. It's got to be hard to kind of, and then to think about coming up with ideas and work. I mean, we've talked about before the struggle of doing stuff that pays versus stuff that that you're doing, that you want to do, and that you're reporting on, and the issues you're reporting on are important ones. But whereas it's got to be tough to find an audience for stuff like that.
It sure is. I mean, I get a little disheartened sometimes, but the good news is that those nonprofits or those for-profits that are in startup mode, and so they're also trying to attract writers. Some of them pay well enough. They don't pay 25 cents a word or 50 cents a word. They pay $1 to $1.50, sometimes even $2 a word, and I can spend a few weeks on a piece that is going to clock in at 3,000 or 4,000 words and get paid a decent amount of money, where if I can string enough of those together, then I'm paying the bills.
Right. How important is time for you for what you do? The time to write and to report and to work on it.
Well, that's I can't do the kind of stories that I do without a ridiculous investment of research, pre-reporting research, then the reporting time, and it's a vast amount of reporting on most of these stories. The writing is not that much time, and maybe that's why I get edited so much. But the editing then takes a lot of time. So, at the end of every project, when I hear other writers talk about calculating their hourly rates, I just think, the hell, I'm not going to do that. I would embarrass myself, much less want anybody else to know what it is, because it's just horrible.
Well, I mean, we've all had that. I think the more work you put into pre-reporting and reporting, the writing tends to come a little faster and tends to come a little easier because you're so. Do you find that too, that you kind of get so embedded, for lack of a better word, in a subject that when you sit down to write, it's a little easier?
Yeah. I'm never not writing, frankly. The minute I have an idea, I'm figuring out how I would tell the story, and as I get into it, I'm figuring out in more detail how I would do it, and I use an outlining and organizational tool called Scrivener, a piece of software that helps writers organize all their research and reporting in one place and outline things in a really easy to see way. So I'm constantly moving that outline around. I'm constantly figuring out how I would tell the story. And so when it is time to write, I have all the notes, all the quotes, all the facts that I will need in any piece of that story are already lined up and ready to go.
That's Scrivener. I use Scrivener for my current projects. I used it in my dissertation. It's not to turn this to an ad because they should sponsor us, but it's wonderful. And I learned the keyboard shortcuts to be able to transcribe in Scrivener, and that was because I did. You can bring in Scrivener, and you can bring in audio, your audio files, and if you split the screen, there are key commands where you can. The transcription commands, so you can pause, rewind, pause, play while you're transcribing.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I use a different piece of software to do that, but the same thing holds true. To transcribe, which we all have to do when we record, is a huge amount of time. I mean, this afternoon I'll be doing an interview that's probably going to last 2 hours with 2 different guys at the same time. It's going to be a transcription challenge to do it quickly, but I'll spend the better part of tomorrow doing that.
Right, that's like a good 8 hours. I remember it's like every hour of interview is like 4 hours of transcribing. I got to pick a better research style so I don't have to transcribe interviews all the time. Or maybe the new iPhone can like start automatically transcribing stuff. So do you tend to be a pretty fast writer once you actually sit down to write?
I do. I deliberately write very quickly in my first draft. And I love the expression that Calvin Trillin uses, which is the vomit out draft.
Yes.
Just vomit it out because it's never going to be what you want, and it's going to be something that if you read later you would vomit again. So I get that out of my system, and then I go back and start revising, because writing is revising.
Right.
And then I still can go pretty fast because, remember, I spent 25 plus years as an editor, and I'm editing myself, and I can be fairly brutal with myself. I can just say, "Wow, that sucked," and just throw it all out and start over.
How much does that editing experience help your writing and recording?
It was a huge help. I never really stopped developing, even though I was afraid I had. I hadn't, because I was working with reporters very intimately. I was writing and rewriting all the time. But it felt funny when I got back into real reporting. It felt funny to make those calls, to sit down with people. It had been a while, and I was rusty. But now that I've been doing it again for 4 or 5 years, it's all come back to me.
Yeah. So, from your editing days and from your teaching days at Syracuse, what are 1 or 2 or maybe even 3? What are the biggest sins you see young writers making, and that you would harp on them to get better at or correct at?
Well, the biggest problem we all have is that it's really hard to get outside of your own head to make a story interesting to others. And that sounds ridiculously obvious, but it's the sin that we all commit over and over, and especially young people who think that everything that they think is interesting and don't want to consider an outsider's point of view. And so that's what editors bring to the transaction. I think a lot of young writers only want to write what they think, and they don't want to do the hard reporting that will open your eyes to different realities and to different points of view, and to channel those stories of other people. That's, to me, a much greater point of satisfaction than just telling you what I think about something. So, but convincing people that it's fun to talk to strangers and to be rejected all the time by strangers who don't want to talk to you. To convince people that that's fun is hard, because it doesn't feel fun at the time.
Right.
But it's the greatest thrill of being a real reporter.
Yeah, and like you were saying with the economics of it, it's becoming like it's got to be challenging to talk to young writers, and I find this too sometimes, that that hard reporting doesn't necessarily pay as much as being able to vomit out, to use that phrase, vomit out an opinion piece and sell it on a blog. And that's a pipe dream too. That's a generalization, but it does seem like for a lot of young writers, they have that idea of, well, I can do this, I can write for Deadspin, I can write for whatever, and getting them to kind of step beyond what that comfort zone is. It's rewarding when they do. I'm sure you found that when you were teaching. I found that too, when you kind of get someone who wants to do it and was shy, but like finally started talking to people. It's really rewarding to kind of see that light bulb go off with them.
Yeah, especially if you want to distinguish yourself for doing something really original.
Mm-hmm.
You have to experience the world in a way that you can't by just being inside your own head.
Mm-hmm.
And once you realize that, and once you appreciate what is out there in the world all around us, to talk to people and to get their truth is really the key to doing this kind of work. Just this morning I was reading a really good piece by Eli Saslow with the Washington Post, who's a Syracuse grad.
Mm-hmm. Who stood me up. I'll tell that story in a second.
He's just fabulous, despite the fact that he stood you up. He's a really fabulous writer, and he is, not just because he has innate skill, and not just because he's worked at his craft, which I'm sure he has, but because he does the hard work of original reporting, and he goes out to weird places and exotic places and ordinary places, and he talks to people and spends a lot of time with them, and then he's got something to say.
Yeah. So the stand-up story I was teaching, it was my last year at Newhouse. You were gone by that point. He had written, it was the series he wrote about food stamps in Texas, in the small towns in Texas, and I still use this feature in classes today because it's brilliant. And I had emailed him and said, teach at Newhouse, would you like to Skype into my class and talk about feature writing? We're using you as an example. He was gracious. He's like, absolutely, sure, count me in. The day he was supposed to speak in class is the day he won the Pulitzer for that series. And obviously he was busy that day, and it never ended up working out. So he didn't really stand me up because he won the Pulitzer for it. But I do love that as an example. I'll put it in the notes for this episode of just the way he structures pieces. I think is just brilliant. I tell my students about using tent poles in the longer series, where it's not really repetition, but you come back to the same themes and stuff, and how it serves to kind of hold a very long piece together. He's masterful at it, especially for being. I think he's younger than I am. So he's
a young guy. Everybody's a young guy to me, but he really is a young guy, and it's wonderful to see. And he's, there are a lot of really talented people. Just in my little field of criminal justice, there are so many really talented 20-somethings, and I just admire them, and I see them doing good work, and there's real hope. There's real hope that people can make a living doing this. You can't let the old farts depress you about how it's all going to hell, and it isn't anywhere near as good as it used to be. It's a different good, and it's going to be okay for people who do the hard work.
When you're writing about issues like crime and victims' rights and kind of sensitive issues like that, how do you balance is the wrong word, but how do you bring your personal views and politics into it, and how do you kind of negotiate that?
Well, you can't help it. Everyone has opinions, but I've been in the business long enough that I know that I've been proven wrong so many times about how the world works and who's right and who's wrong, that I do try really, really hard to keep an open mind. And the greatest enjoyment, twisted though it may sound, the greatest enjoyment I get from this work is when I can write a story that contradicts my own beliefs.
Do you have an example when that happened?
Sure. I had a fellowship from a very liberal organization called the Soros Justice Fellowships, which was a great gig to get. It paid me well for a whole year to work on a series of stories, all in my area, and 3 or 4 of those stories directly contradicted the sort of mindset of the people around me in that program. And I didn't do it intentionally, but as I reported, I started coming to different conclusions than what I'd been hearing, and I was thrilled. And I was really hoping somebody would call me on it and be all irate about it, but they didn't, because they appreciated that there were nuances to this. We talked about restorative justice a minute ago. One of the stories was about how it makes sense, but it hasn't gotten traction as a fundamental solution to handling crime and crime victims, and I explored why that is, and whether it could ever succeed, and I wasn't very optimistic. And so that was a direct contradiction of what I hoped and thought, and I was pleased with that story.
Yeah, I remember doing the research on that, and it's one of those things that it's one of those things that restorative justice, to get off on a too big a tangent on it, but it's actually really fascinating and interesting and helpful, but you can absolutely see, we won't go into what it is, but you can absolutely see why it would not be popular. You know, it's an idea of much more a relationship between a crime victim and the criminal, and you can understand why a lot of people would not want to delve into that, especially maybe systematically. It's one of those things that seems to me make sense on an individual level, but kind of as a systematic approach, you can kind of see why it wouldn't do that. So when you're writing that, do you ever have that hesitation of not allowing it to contradict yourself, or do you welcome that contradiction?
I welcome it.
Okay.
I welcome it, but then I put the brakes on, because I realized that I could just be falling in love with a whole new idea that is equally dubious. And so you really have to be careful as a reporter to realize that we never tell the whole truth. We can't possibly explain everything in as much detail as is required to make it fully understandable. What we can do is try to make complex things interesting and show that there are complications to what everyone else is inclined to think. That's, to me, about as close as you can get to the truth.
Mm-hmm. What's your writing day look like typically?
Well, I'm a freak of nature. I'm up by between 4 and 4:30 in the morning. I blame it on the Newhouse School, because I had to get up really early to drive all the way to Syracuse. But so I'm sort of hardwired to get up that early. I do a ton of reading. I read the New York Times. I read my local paper. I read a lot of online stuff. And then I have breakfast with my wife. We walk our dogs. And then I dig into, by then I can actually start making calls to people, because I've learned, I suspect that making phone calls at 5 a.m. is not going to make me very popular. So I lay out my phone calls that I'm hoping to get back someday. And then I do whether I'm doing pre-reporting research or outlining or writing or whatever stage I'm at, I almost always have at least 3 stories going at any given time. At different stages of development. One's in editing, one I'm writing, and one I'm just reporting. And so I'm juggling a lot of things all day long. And I usually put it, after a lunch break, I usually work until 5 or 6. And so, not counting breaks, that's a 13-hour day. And I do that every day. I work on the weekends too, especially when I'm on deadline. I don't work that long on Saturdays and Sundays, but I work long hours. The writing part, I tell myself, is going to be the fun part, and then when I'm doing it, I'm like dying. I have to get up and walk away from the screen because it's not happening. And so it's just a long series of frustrations, basically.
What is the best thing you've read lately?
Oh, goodness.
Or a good thing that you've read lately?
The best thing I've read lately, and it was a few months ago, is a book called Ghetto Side by a LA Times reporter named Jill Levy. And it's the best explanation I've seen, and I've spent years doing my own reporting on this and reading everything there is to read. It's the best explanation I've read of the realities of urban crime and what can be done about it. And I just admired it so much. It was a work of art, and the best thing of all is it had amazing characters that you fall in love with and you care about, and it's just a fabulous piece of journalism.
Awesome. And lastly, we talk a lot about music. We're both kind of fans of the same. We hate the phrase alt country, but for the purposes of shorthand, it's kind of
Americana.
Americana. There you go.
Whatever that means.
For lack of clarity, we'll use that. So you introduced me to the Wood Brothers. Eternally grateful for that. So what is a music recommendation or two that you can pass along?
Well, my latest things that I really love, Alabama Shakes, which is no secret. Everybody knows who they are, but they're amazing. Lake Street Dive, I highly recommend it.
They've come up on my Spotify or my
Very
Pandora a
cool,
lot.
very very good young band, and I still go to the old standby Texas singer-songwriters that I love. I just love storytelling in song form.
Is that something you think is, since you lived in Texas for a while, is that something that's kind of peculiar or typical of a certain music scene in Texas, do you think?
Yeah, the Austin scene has its own sound and its own methods, and it's what I gravitate to, partly because I lived there for a long time, but partly because it's just the best music there is.
Awesome. Mark Obbie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.